Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Connect Conversations. Today's conversation is all about employee engagement, and it's brought to you as a part of Mobius Connect's ongoing YouTube series, Connect Conversations. I'm Kim Fugger, and I will be your moderator for today's session. First, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the host of Connect Conversations series, Global Reliability Improvement experts Doug Pluckna and Ron Moore. Hi, guys. Are you here with me?
I reckon.
Hello, Kim. How you doing?
Good. Well, before I pass the microphone officially over to you guys, I want to encourage our audience here today to submit any questions that you have into the question panel of the screen here in Zoom. And Doug and Ron will be more than happy to answer your questions throughout our time here today. Your questions will be aired anonymously, so don't feel like you're going to get called out directly. Ron and Doug are here to provide their advice and perspectives from the experiences and are here to help you. All right, guys, I'm going to pass things over to you.
Okay, thanks. And thanks everybody for joining us. Today we're going to talk about engagement. It's not the kind of engagement like you're engaged to be married or you engage and destroy the enemy as in the military or you engage in a conversation. It's more about employee engagement. And I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just giving you some high level stuff. And then Doug, who has more direct hands-on experience, is going to go into some of the detail. In my mind, engagement means people come to work looking forward to it. They're always looking for ways to improve things. They're always looking to learn. They frequently, go to their boss or whoever and discuss issues and opportunities for improvement. They're engaged. They're enthused about their work. Now, with that in mind, just a couple of comments. Bob Kelleher, a fellow I know, and he does a lot of work in this field. He says something on the order of 30% of your employees are engaged. They're doing the things I just mentioned. About 50% are not engaged. That is, they show up to work, they do the minimum, and one view might be they get by. And it's not cause for maybe termination, but they're not particularly engaged. And then there's a 15-20% that are actively disengaged. That is, their contribution may actually be negative in terms of the morale on the workforce, the work they're doing, and so on. So that's one little factoid for you. And we don't know anything about your organization. This is just a survey from a broad array of companies. And the second little factoid is that engaged employees are 3 times more productive than those who are not. Now think about the math of that. If you could get 20% of your workforce engaged, that would be like getting, 6 minus 2, that'd be like getting 4 more people. My goodness, wouldn't that be wonderful? That's just 2 people. And the last little factoid I'll give you is Klaus Blake. He says that 70% of all improvement ideas come from engaged employees. So those are just some really, important sets of data that I think, everybody should be aware of and should use when you're out there talking to the workforce and setting up things like structured improvement time, cross-functional teams, training programs and the like. So, okay, that's my nickel's worth to kind of give some high-level data. Doug, you wrote a paper about all this. Why don't you share folks with some of that? And I may interject here and there.
All right. So, a while back, I wrote a paper on this, why your employees are or not engaged. And there's several reasons. I've worked as a facilitator, facilitating events, RCM, typically in most cases at companies all over the world. And every once in a while, you have that meeting on Friday with the managers and somebody pipes up and says, boy, we can't believe how good you are at getting the employees to talk, right? You got a lot of information on them. We never get this much. And I just kind of sit there and tilt my head and think, do you talk to them?
Yeah.
Do you listen? Right? Because those
There
are
is
two key
that.
things. You know, you do have to talk to them and you do have to listen. But I did go into a little more detail than that on the paper that I wrote on this a while back. And it started out with, you know, the different reasons why they're not engaged or what causes for disengagement. Number one really is career growth is non-existent or limited. You know, if we're looking at shop floor people, I don't know what happened a while back, but it's going back, you know, 30, 40 years. All of a sudden, you had to have a college degree to be a supervisor. And so that took one of those roles out where you could advance through your job into different roles, whether it was a lead person or supervisor or a planner or a scheduler or all kinds of different things. Well, we seem to take more and more of those away and give those opportunities to sometimes new hire engineers or people that have business administration degrees and those types of things. And regardless of that, it really comes down to you need to be able to recognize people some way, and they need to have some type of career growth, right? And if you're requiring education, then I guess the part of that you can come back to people with is to say, hey, we'll help you with that degree at night or part-time or whatever you want to go to school, because we recognize you're somebody that could be of value to the company. Today, people tend to bounce around between jobs more than they did in the past, but that loyalty goes a long way with people. I can tell you that I worked for a company that paid for my degree at night, and you won't hear me say anything bad about that company. Looking at other reasons why people's ideas or opinions aren't valued is another one. So when I talk to people and sit down and have these events, that'll be the one thing that if I do get a gripe is I start asking for, all right, what's going on? What are the reasons why this is failing? What are the failure modes that are causing this? And if the room is quiet, eventually somebody will say, you know, they really don't care what we think or what we say. And I say, well, I'm not them. I'm somebody that's coming in here to work with you and hopefully teach you to say, how do we go about solving our problems? I value your opinion. I can tell you that I don't know that machine that you're working with and we're talking about nearly as well as you do. And so I need to know what's going on out there. And those are your opinions. And in most cases, they're not opinions at all. They're facts. You're working with it. You know whether or not this works right or what causes it to fail sometimes. So we need to know and understand what's going on out there. I value your input, right? And this doesn't work without it. And as you pointed out earlier, you know, when you look at improvements in companies, 70% of the improvement ideas that go around into manufacturing come from the employees, those that are engaged. If you don't have that engagement, you're missing out on that. The third one I listed here was there's no confidence in managers or products. And that's a difficult one. It sometimes sounds like, and I'm sure you've dealt with this, Ron, my boss doesn't know his front side from his back, right? He's been here 6 months and he's the third one in the last 4 years, and there'll be another one. People need to work with somebody that's also engaged in the business and understands the equipment, right? Understands the products that they make.
Yeah. Let me just interject a couple of things there, Doug. You know, one of the things we used to do back in my good old days when I was president of CSI, we would have these so-called, I don't remember if they were 360 or 180 reviews. You know, that is the staff of every manager got to rate their boss, you know, confidentially.
Right.
And then myself and a couple other guys would review all that. And we would either counsel whoever it was without identifying the individuals who, you know, made the comment, Or actually, in one case, we went to one of the engineering managers and said, you know, you're really a good employee, just not in this role. and, and, you know, and he took it well. He, you know, apparently he didn't really want that role. And we put him into more of a, you know, a staff role where he didn't have to supervise people. And he was quite content with that. So 360 or 180, you know, where the guys, you know, review their boss, I think is probably a good idea if it's handled properly. And that's a huge if. It's, you know, it's a lot of risk in doing something like that.
Yeah, I can tell you my experience with it, and this is one that you'll chuckle about. And it was my first opportunity working as supervision, and my employees rated me, and I had an experienced supervisor that worked with as a mentor, you know, so I'd go to him if we had any personnel issues and run things by him. And then we had a division manager above us. Well, we all were in a meeting talking about the employee reviews for the supervisor. It turned out I ended up the highest, right? And my mentor says to me afterwards, you might think that was a good thing. He goes, but really what it shows is you're too nice to your people. And I said to him, you might want to talk to my people. My crew's not very big, but I could tell you, you know, I got 8 guys and all 8 have been in my office at one time or another for a butt chewing, right? The difference is when it's over, if the behavior, I don't see it again, we don't ever talk about it again. It's gone, right? People, if they respect their boss and you have that open communication, they will be engaged. They will come talk to you about those things, right?
Yeah. Let me just put in another comment about something you said, you know, right up front. One of the things I used to do is walk around, you know, I would commit 2 or 3 or 4 hours a week, just walk around the company and randomly and just talk to people and find, you know, how they're doing, you know, what some of the issues were and so on. And if a problem arose, I would ask them if they had a solution. And not only that, but if I didn't think that would work, I would tell them why. And you really, or in some cases, I go back to maybe their boss or, you know, one of the, you know, more senior level guys and say, hey, you need to look at this, and, you know, without getting anybody into trouble or anybody worrying about, you know, saying something out of hand or untoward. And initially, folks were a little bit, I don't know, threatened, intimidated by that. But after a while, they came to expect it and got used to it. So if you do it properly and you explain, you take ideas in, explain people, you know, what you're going to do or what you're not going to do and why, I think they're much more willing to volunteer information so that you can provide guidance and provide tools and training and whatever's necessary. So I found that to be especially enlightening and helpful.
I know in the past that you've done studies about safety and reliability, and I've often wondered about this one. Engagement, I think, is always a big piece in safety, right? If you don't have open communication with your people and they don't feel that they can come into your office and tell you whatever's going on out there, you're not going to hear about those issues with safety, right? The people that disregard it or equipment that is acting up that could be a problem. If you don't have that open communication, you're going to miss out on those things as well. I mean, so not only is it a reliability thing, it really is it's an engagement piece. All right. You want your people to feel free to be able to come in and talk about anything that's going on out there. And you know, that comes into safety, it comes into environmental issues, you know, leaks and issues they're having out there with that type of equipment. I can tell you that early on in my career, having to clean out plugged up chemical lines, there's stuff that I think about today that it was like, my God, why the heck did they have us doing that? That really wasn't the right thing to be doing at that time. But I wasn't in a position where I had a place that I could go to and say, what is the impact of this? Is this something really we should be doing? Right? Should this
Yeah.
stuff actually be going to the gravel outside there on the ground?
Or should I be handling it?
Right.
So,
should I let it spray all over me with that water that we're using
yeah.
to open that line up with?
Yeah.
Right.
Another suggestion, and it kind of depends.
Hello.
All right, we had a little bit of an interruption there, but in any event, I think when we left off, I was talking about, I had a pretty big megaphone for the company, but so apply this next example I'm going to give you as you can and as appropriate. But I used to tell folks at company meetings, look, you're closer to the problems than I am. You see a problem, solve it. If you make a mistake, I forgive you. If you make a big mistake, it's my fault. And the point of that was you got to trust your people to do the right thing. And you occasionally have to allow them to make a mistake or two without fearing, that the hammer is going to come down on them and expect them to apply good judgment. Now, did that work? Yes. Was there occasions where people screwed up? Yes. Did I forgive them? Yes. So now I'm not suggesting that managers should abdicate their responsibility. You have to be so-called proactive in making sure that folks have the right time, tools, training, and so on. But you also have to encourage them to occasionally take a little bit of risk. And then if it doesn't pan out, work with them to, learn from the mistake and move on into the future with a better approach. So that's my approach. I don't know if that's possible for everybody, but I think it worked, and it worked really well. But you got to be prepared. Every now and again, somebody's going to screw something up. You just can't lower the hammer on them. Doug, back to you.
All right. So the next item I had here to talk about was, I think I went over open communication, not encouraged. It's next would be the endless cycle of managers, and I touched on that briefly. But between supervisors and managers, it's not uncommon for somebody that has worked in a production line or an operations at some manufacturing plant that over their career to see 10 to 15 different managers, right?
Yeah.
And they realize that, when you get to that point where, as you said, they got that 50% that's not actively engaged, they just say to themselves, all I got to do is wait this out. I mean, I come in here and do my job and do what they pay me to do and nothing more. And the next manager is going to change. And those that are actively disengaged thrive on this, right? They actually say, hey, I know that one thing that's true is I'll be here longer than you. So you can make my life miserable for a couple of years if you want. But guess what? There'll be somebody else coming in here and I'll still be here and you'll be someplace else. Because I've seen it happen, and I've heard guys actually talk to managers that way, right?
Yeah, you're just another pretty face passing through. I'm quoting.
Yeah, I can remember, and this is when I was an apprentice way back at Kodak. I can remember one of our journeymen that was a shift worker, so he'd probably been with the company, 25, 30 years at the time, and we had a new maintenance manager come in, and he introduced himself, and the guy said to him right in front of the whole group, aren't you the same guy that ran a construction business by that name here in Rochester for about 2 years? Yeah, that was me. What happened to that business? And it was kind of quiet in the room. And he says, you filed for bankruptcy. What in the world makes you think that you'd be any better at this than you were at that?
My
Right.
goodness.
And it was just dead silent. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, what a freaking jerk. I cannot believe he said that. Right. And then, 4 or 5 years later, when I get to know this guy, I said, so man, why the hell did you do that? And he said, you're going to realize what a wheel this is. And it don't matter which one of them guys comes in here and does this. All they're going to try to do is make your life miserable. And I thought to myself, I never caught that was a manager's role, was to make people's life miserable.
Yeah. Well, just some more little factoids for you. Average last data I saw, and it may have changed some, but the last data I saw, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies typically last around 3.5 years.
Yeah.
Plant managers, site managers, and so on typically last somewhere around 2.5 to 3 years. And then below that, you got production, maintenance, engineering, and so on. So it's really, my experience has been, it's really quite common at a site, a plant where you got a plant manager, maintenance, production, engineering, that one of those guys will change every year. Now, it may not be every year, might be every year and a half or 2 years, but one of those guys is going to change quite often. And, that just sort of leaves you wondering about the stability of the management team and the implications of that if you don't have specific strategies, philosophies, standards, and so on that everybody's expected to follow. I think that works in the U.S. military because they have that.
Yeah.
I don't know that it works that well in industry. So, one of the things Deming said is that constancy of purpose is essential. Now, that there's a presumption there that your procedures and standards and so on are reasonably good, and you're looking for ways to improve them. But it just disrupts a lot of folks. And after a while, they become numb to it. We'll be here when you're gone. So to you.
All right.
Anyways, back to you.
Next on my list is punishment is valued more than the truth. And this comes from, if somebody comes in and tells you something that's the truth and you don't like what that you heard and you punish that person for that, expect to see mass disengagement, not just that person, but multiple people that they work with. Right. You have to be able to, whether you like the truth or not, deal with those issues. It's part of that open communication, right? The story that I told about my manager and that guy talking about his business, right? I give that manager credit. I never heard him say a bad word about that guy after that. And I thought, gosh, that's one tough individual to stand up there and take that. But what the fella said was the truth. Your business went bankrupt. What makes you think you were going to do any better at this than you did at that? Right. And he did have an answer for that. He said, hey, I ran a small business. The economy changed and the housing business went down the tubes. And so my electric company that was thrived on wiring up new homes disappeared. Right. So,
yeah. And by the way, all you got to do is lie or substantially mislead one time.
That's it.
And after that, everything you say is suspect.
Yeah. And so that's one of those things I just tell people, you have to be able to respond to the truth and you can't lie. All right. Those are two great big things. And if you want people to be engaged, you have to be honest with them.
Yep.
Another one is that the managers themselves aren't engaged. And this is one of those that's pretty rare. I will say this. I haven't come across this many times. When I did come across it, it was because they were at a point in their career where they were about to jump ship and go somewhere else. And they saw that things weren't going well. And as a result, they kind of kicked back and closed the door and watched it all burn up around them. And that's a tough thing for the employees to deal with and work through.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for people to be engaged, you have to be engaged yourself. Right.
Yeah, just a word of caution there. I've had at least one boss who was too engaged in the sense that he wanted to micromanage every little thing I did, and he drove me nuts.
Oh, that can happen.
So there's a fine balance you have to strike, and it probably is dependent on the employee. Some guys need a lot of attention, and some guys don't need very much at all. And so if you're in charge, you have to make some judgment and some decision about how much engagement you give them. So that's just the one little word of caution. And you'll make mistakes, but don't worry about it. Just apologize and do the best you can not do it again. So
All right. My last one here is one that's become an issue in the last, let's say, 10 years. And that's outside distractions cause disengagement. And what I'm talking about is this is the internet, social media, cell phones, the economy, healthcare, national debt, the Super Bowl, World Series, monthly bills, college costs, the balance in the checking account. My kids got suspended from school. The list goes on, and it can continue to grow. And you have to be able to deal with those issues as a manager today. That work environment has changed, and it actually requires you to be more engaged with your people. I have a good friend that runs a small business, and that's one thing he complains about all the time. Geez, if it's not the cell phones, it's the conversations that they're having on the cell phones, and they're picking on one another, and they're blah, 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 blah. And I said, you need to get them all in a room. You need to have a talk with them about it, right? That during work hours, you can play with that thing at break, right? Off hours, if you're picking on one another, it applies to whether you're here or whether you're not here, right? There is no bullying to be going on. We have standards for that, and you have to address those things. Right. And I will address those things. And once you start doing that, you'll find that stuff calms down and it quiets down. Right. It's part of where we are today in society, like it or not. As I said, the last things, last parts on those lists, they've always been around. The Super Bowl, the World Series, the bills, the college costs, the problems with family and kids. And those have already been there. Right. And the better you know your people, the more likely they are to come to you and be honest with you about those things, to where they're not distracted so often.
yeah.
Right.
I'll just interject a comment here, Doug. I think to be a good supervisor, it requires a degree of empathy. You can relate to the folks and the difficulties they're having, while at the same time setting high standards and expectations. Sure. And that's sometimes that can be a really difficult balance to strike, being empathetic to the problem, but saying, look, we still got to get this job done. So what can I do to make sure we get that done? What external resources do we need, or what additional training do we need, or what counseling can the company provide, to help resolve some of these issues. So it's difficult to empathize and set high standards, for the work that's being done. But I think if you set your mind to do that, you'll do it most of the time.
Very good. So now that we've spent about 30 minutes talking about the things that cause disengagement, what can you do about it? And I think I have a list of some things or suggestions that I put into that article as well.
Yeah, we've kind of touched on them as we've gone too, but go ahead. And I've got some suggestions I'll offer as well.
Sure. Number one is just to become an engaged listener. And you talked about go out there and be on the floor and talk to people. An engaged listener is somebody that I can tell you, I worked with a guy, and it was my first customer coming out into the consulting business. And he was maintenance and engineering manager, and eventually became the plant manager at a Whirlpool plant. And when I first met him, I always thought, geez, he's kind of rough around the edges, and because he point blank told people what he expected of them. Right. When I first met with them and said, here's what RCM and here's what I offer and here's what my training model is. He sat in that meeting for 20 minutes and he said, I've got another meeting. I got a hard stop I got to go to. I've heard enough. And he looked at the other three guys in the room. You're going to do this, you're going to do this, and you're going to do that. And I don't want to hear any issues about why it can't be done. When can you be back here? He looked at me and I told him, in 3 weeks. And he said, mark it on the calendar. That'll be your first week here. Right. And I thought to myself, boy, he's a little bit rough. But then when I got in and started working with those folks and saw how he went about doing his business, every day at lunch, this manager would come to the cafeteria. He'd sit at our table, right, talk about what was going on with the training, gobble down his sandwich, whatever he had in his bag. And then he got up and he went around that cafeteria like the father of the bride does at a wedding, talking to people at every table. And I was amazed at watching him, how many people's names he knew, but not only their names, because this was a good sized plant, there's 200-300 people there working on each shift. And he'd know their kids' names, what sports they were involved in. And I mean, he just had these tremendous conversations with people, and he'd go from one table to the next, for the 15-20 minutes we had left. I'd sit and watch him every day. And I finally said to the rest of the guys, he's really a good guy. And they went, oh, that's the best manager we've ever had here. Yeah. Right. People love him. And that's all it took was for him to show that he cared about people. Right.
Yeah. Well, he was, seems to me, based on what you said, he was being empathetic and setting high standards and expectations. Clear, yeah. Right?
Very clear. And he'd walk out, you'd see him if, we'd be out on the floor looking at a machine, and I'd see him walking through, if there was a screw or a nut or something laying on the floor that was out of place, right, he'd pick it up and take it to where it belonged, or, throw it in the metal bin or whatever. And if there was more than one, then the person that station it was, he'd have a word with them about, you got to make sure that when, before you go to break, you pick these up. Right. Don't leave them laying on the floor. We don't need anybody slipping on these things. Right.
Right.
And that's all it takes really, is to show people that you care, show people that you're out there, show them that you're willing to lend a hand. It makes a big difference. So really that active listening is a big part of just having those general conversations. Know your people, that goes into what I was just talking about.
Yep.
Study and use performance management. I've talked about this, I think, endlessly with some of our conversations, but that really gets into knowing where to use positive reinforcement, where to use punishment, and how to treat people and how to get more out of people, so that percent of engaged goes from 20 and 30% to higher numbers than that. Hopefully 60-70% would be nice, wouldn't it?
Oh, it'd be wonderful. Well, when on punishment, just had a comment that should be reserved as sort of a last ditch thing after you've coached, counseled, talked, and so on and so forth, and it should be done in private.
Yeah.
What my experience has been, if you don't do that, everybody else looks at that individual and says, well, I only got to do is a little bit better than that guy. They set the standard for the group when you don't address it. So it still needs to be addressed with respect, with dignity, and so on and so forth. And to some extent, maybe punishment's not the right word. Challenge the folks and do it enough times so that you're confident you're making the right decision if you have to actually go into punishment. So that'd be my nickel's worth.
Very good. Lead by example is another one. I think if you show people that again, you're engaged, that you come to work on time, that you use your time wisely, that you treat people like you would like to be treated, and you make your work environment a clean place, people respect that, right?
Yep. Yep.
So you can't expect them to be doing 5S out on the shop floor, right, or the production floor if your office is a damn mess, right?
Yeah.
People
Well, you
see,
can,
they see
but
right
it's not a
through
good
that.
example.
Exactly. The next one I have is to set one clear goal. And this seems to be changing right now. Used to be anytime you went to a company, you'd see somewhere listed the mission, the vision, the goal of the company. And one of my favorite things to do would be to, once I got a group into a room, I'd ask them what the mission,
Yeah.
mission,
Nobody
vision,
knew.
and goal were, and nobody would know, right? And I
Yeah.
say to them, it's right out there on a wall. Where? Right, as soon as you come in, right,
Yeah.
right there at the main door. Well, we don't come in the main door. All right, so they've never gone over this with you. Uh, I think that you're far better off by setting one clear goal, which is continuous improvement. And then I ask people, what does that mean and how have we continuously improved in your area? Can you tell me some of the improvements that have been made in the last year, 6 months, 3 years, 5 years? All right, let's have a conversation about that. Is this just talk or are we actually doing it? And you'll
Yep.
find it in most places they're trying. They'll say, hey, there's some things that were here 4 or 5 years ago that were just awful that we've changed and it's gotten better. Right. And that gets people thinking and talking on the right foot, right?
Yeah.
To say,
Just a personal experience here, Doug. I helped put together, CSI's original mission statement, and it was something to the effect of blah 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 blah. Because in one of my walkabouts, I said, wait, to one of the employees on the floor, I said, what do you think about our new mission statement? And she said, oh yeah, it's really good, really, really good. And I said, what is it? And she says, well, I said, don't worry about it. It's not important.
yeah.
And it wasn't. So we put our heads together and we created a mission statement. Our mission was to improve world maintenance productivity, period. And so anything you do in this company, it's got to contribute to that. And that stuck. And, so it, and a joke here, you know the difference between a mission statement and a vision statement?
I'm waiting to hear it.
About $200,000. So I mean, that's all good stuff for the board to sit and go through and understand, but you got to condense it into one simple statement or no more than two.
right.
Otherwise, it gets lost in the forest. So, and that's my personal experience with that.
All right. So I've got on here the next one, to celebrate sustained success. Lots of times I've been to places where they celebrate, well, this is their best week ever, right? And then you come back a month later, and so how did it work out from the best week ever? You had another best week yet? And it gets quiet in the room. I go, it's one thing to break a record. It's another thing to consistently meet that number, right?
Yeah.
And what can you consistently operate at? And if we do that, in the end, are we better than we were a year ago or 6 months ago or the last 3 months, right? What do we need to do to beat that number, right? Well, we need to be able to sustain what we've done, right? To keep it happening.
Let me throw something out there too, Doug. Sometimes it's not, a big celebration with balloons and banners and all that crap. Sometimes it's just going and talking to, to the guys and saying, thank you. That was a really good job. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You might say, you got any other ideas like that? But just showing a degree of gratitude to the folks doing the work.
Yeah.
And occasionally saying, hey, let's go to lunch. Or, hey, free pizza for the company this week because we had a good week. Or, just little things that demonstrate that you care. And then the big things that we used to do, we reserved a percentage of our gross profit such that if we made money, everybody got some.
There you go.
And some of it was a percentage of your base pay. Okay, some of it was set aside to recognize and reward particularly large contributions from certain people and so on. But I think it has to cover kind of a spectrum of a simple thing like thank you, good job, all the way up through some sort of profit sharing, with the folks, so that, they know you appreciate their contribution, and if they know they're appreciated, they're more likely to be engaged, I think.
Yeah. So, there's been way too many pizza parties at lots of places. And
well, I don't do it all the time, just
yeah,
once a quarter maybe, or for an event.
Yeah.
So,
and sometimes I tell bosses, I'm not telling you to stop doing those things, right? But if it's for, gee, we made our best number, or we didn't have any safety incidents, or the things that you talked about are far more meaningful. Just get them together and say, hey, man, we did this and this is something else. And then on any given day, just buy that pizza and say, hey, I just wanted to say thank you for being here. Right.
Well, here's another idea for folks too. Once a week, we would buy lunch for anybody that wanted to come.
Yeah.
And at that lunch, there'd be a topic. It might be a new employee benefit. It might be a new product. It might be a problem we were having within the company that we were working on, so that we shared with people what we were doing. I mean, it could be almost anything, but we would buy lunch, and anybody that wanted to come to the meeting where we were discussing this thing was welcome. And that keep having that open, direct communication with folks, particularly if it's something bad, because if you don't tell the truth about something bad, crap will be made up and it'll get worse.
Oh, for sure.
So
for sure.
Another my nickel's worth.
Another way of improving things is to recognize your leaders by line, by section, by department, by team, and of course individuals, and make this recognition as personal as possible. Newsletters and bulletin boards are fine, but recognition really should be public, and it should be personal, and it should be face to face, where you can shake people's hands and look them in the eye and thank them. Right. Change comes through really strong leadership, and your best leaders need to be recognized.
Yeah.
Right. Look, I can't say enough about that.
Yeah. I want to throw in a couple of other ideas for everybody too, Doug. And, one of the things I've found works really well is to have structured improvement time where you pull together cross-functional teams to address issues where a cross-functional team is needed. Maybe it's a permitting process where there, maintenance and production are both involved. Maybe it's a particular machine, but have structured improvement time. Now, what does that mean? Well, it depends on how you define it. Maybe once a month you have a day within a department to do problem solving or process improvement or something like that. Or maybe it's, every 2 weeks you have half a day, or maybe it's an hour here or there. But you want to have it, kind of loosely structured so that people expect that when there's an issue or a problem, you're going to put your heads together, excuse me, and resolve it. And I think it's particularly important to have cross-functional teams come together and begin to empathize and appreciate one another's contribution and one another's problems, and in order to, garner that engagement with each other, as opposed to criticizing each other relative to a particular, machine problem or a particular, issue with a process or a procedure. So I think that's, really important. I've already touched on walking around. Go ahead.
For places that don't know where to start with that, we underutilize our CMMS system in terms of the business, right? It's always viewed of as a maintenance tool, but in reality, it's a tool it's a business tool. All right. So what are we spending the most time on? What are we spending the most money on? What are the repeat offenders? Right. Print those out to give people ideas. Operations can do the same thing with their uh, system that operates the equipment. What are the things that are causing the short stops? Right. 5-10-second interval stops of a line. Right. Give me the number one stops, the stops that took the longest, right? Print those out every week to give those teams that you're talking about, where we've dedicated time for them, ideas, so that they don't see those systems of just black holes that they pour information in and nothing comes out of.
Yeah. Another technique that I've used, and this one's a little more difficult because it's resource intensive, is what's called a DILO, a day in the life of.
Right.
I would, bolt myself or shadow a mechanic or a millwright and just walk around with them all day long. Initially, they're kind of nervous about this. And I say, look, I'm not here to see if you're working. I'm here to see what's, getting in your way of getting your job done. I don't have any doubt that you want to do a good job. So what's stopping you from doing that? Is it a work permit? Is it a part? Is it access to the equipment? Is it, you don't have an actual work assignment? What is it? And, and we're going to try to use that to minimize and mitigate some of these issues and problems to, either eliminate them or minimize them. And, that's something you can do, particularly, for example, around tool time. Most folks say, the guys that study this say tool time's around 25-30%. Well, there's a reason for that. And there's lots of reasons.
Yeah.
And if you do a DILO, you'll stumble across most of them.
Yeah.
So that's another technique to engage, particular individuals, particularly if you share that information with all the other mechanics about what you found, what you're going to do, solicit their feedback about issues they're dealing with, and then put together a plan on how you're going to work to minimize that and address it. So that's one more technique that I think works really well.
Very good. Well, we are
we out of time?
Close on our time now.
Yep.
I'm not sure if you have anything more.
No, I think we've covered the other things on my little bullet points on my checklist in one form or another. So I think we're, I guess we're done, Doug. We'll let people go 2 minutes early or whatever it is, So,
yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you both for another great conversation. Your time here was great today. This was an awesome presentation. On behalf of the entire team at Mobius Connect, thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us today. Just as a quick reminder, you can see past episodes of Connect Conversations on YouTube and Reliability Connect. Be on the lookout as new episodes typically air every other Tuesday at 2 p.m. Our next episode coming up is Electric Power Reliability with special guest Alan Ross from EPRA. If you are interested in engaging with other industry professionals or would like to participate on the industry's live feed forums on Mobius Connect, you can visit mobiusconnect.com to create your free profile. And be sure to like us on social media at Mobius Connect to stay up to date with the latest community happenings. If you do have any questions for Ron or Doug or Mobius Connect, and please email at info@mobiusconnect.com. Thanks again for joining us. Have a safe time, and we will see you next time.